And it's so very important to explain to children, there's absolutely nothing wrong with your brain. It's simply a different way that it learns. And then we can talk about all the superpowers that come with their neurodiversity.
Lingokids!
From brushing teeth with Lisa to building towers with Cowie.
This is the way.
From counting and cheering 5 to cooking with Elliot. From spelling with Billy C to singing with Baby Bots.
Yes!
For today's world, educational subjects meet modern life skills. Jump into the Lingokids universe, voted the #1 learning app for kids. Lingokids. Play today, learn for life.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Suzanne Barchers, and I'm so glad to be here with you tonight. I'm chair of the educational board at Lingokids. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to all the parents who have submitted questions for us tonight. We've tried to group them by the most common topics, and if we have time at the end, we will try to get a few more sneaked into the webinar, but I'm sure we're going to want to do another webinar. As you know, Lingokids is a leading education award-winning app for kids, and our mission is to help you raise amazing kids. We've been in existence since 2015, and I've been with the group advising them from the very beginning when there were just a half a dozen or more employees. And the growth has been phenomenal. It's been exciting to be part of that period of growth. Now, we're live. It's just a little bit after 7 o'clock Pacific time, and we have about 45 minutes where we can really glean some great information from our guest tonight. And this is Dr. Barrett. And Deanna, would you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started with our questions?
Sure. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here tonight. I'm so excited to be here and be part of this amazing organization. Like Suzanne mentioned, my name is Dr. Barrett, and I have been with the Abbey Neuropsychology Clinic in Palo Alto, California for about 15 years. So immediately following my postdoctoral work at Stanford in child and adolescent psychiatry, I joined forces with Dr. Richard Abbey and the Abbey Clinic. When I first arrived at the clinic, my primary role was in assessment. So I did a lot of work in assessing children, adolescents, and adults, looking at a variety of presenting concerns, everything from learning differences to autism, ADHD, traumatic brain injuries, depression, and anxiety. And now I've moved into another role, which is not only the assessment side of things, but really in treatment and how we can optimize a child's success and their well-being with non-medication based interventions. So that's who I am, and that's some of the work that I do.
That's great. And I especially like your comment about non-medication interventions, because that was near and dear to my heart as I was raising my children. So let's dive into it. We're going to cover the top categories of the questions that we received. Neurodiversity was very important. Autism, issues with sleep, tantrums and behavior, and of course, language acquisition. So let's start with neurodiversity. And we have some slides that you have prepared for us. So I hope everybody can see those. And if not, you can always access them later on our website. So tell us, what can you tell us about neurodiversity, and what do parents need to know about it?
Sure. You know, one of the things that I really appreciate about that term neurodiversity is it very much captures all of the positive aspects and the uniqueness for individuals with neurodiversity. So I've pulled a definition of what neurodiversity is from the National Institute of Mental Health, and I thought we could share it now. So neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many ways with no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving. And differences are not deficits.
Neurodiversity refers to the diversity of all people, but is often used in the context of autism spectrum disorder, and other neurological or developmental disorders such as ADHD or dyslexia. Referring to somebody as neurodiverse or neurodivergent is a way to focus on the positive aspects of their differences and on what that can bring to a group setting rather than focusing on a disability. So again, it very much captures the uniqueness of this group. It reminds me of when I give feedbacks to families and particularly sit with children and describe their profile to them. And it's so very important to explain to children, there's absolutely nothing wrong with your brain. It's simply a different way that it learns. And then we can talk about all the superpowers that come with their neurodiversity. All right. One of the questions that came up from our group of parents that are out there is, how can I begin to tell and what are the signs that my child may be neurodiverse? Well, again, we just learned that neurodiversity really captures a wide range of presentations: dyslexia, ADHD, autism. But what we're going to talk about right here is some of the ways that you may be able to begin to tell that your child may have autism, what to look for, and when to seek help of a professional and getting that diagnosis. When we think about this neurodiverse group, we want to think about symptoms in two buckets. And as you can see up on your screen, those two buckets are social communication and repetitive stereotyped behaviors. So let's look at that first bucket, which is social communication. So often when people think of social communication and even hear the word communication, people think spoken language. That's only one component. So sometimes I have parents coming to me for an evaluation for autism because their child has a delay in spoken language. But what we want to be really aware of, again, is that spoken language is only one component of communication. And what's really important is that we consider all of the other aspects of communication, and that's what we call nonverbal communication. So when we're looking at nonverbal communication, we're looking at all the other ways that we all communicate. You can see now I'm using gestures. So gestures is something we look at, including the use of a point. We look at facial expressions, emotional expressions. We look at the way our eyes communicate and eye contact. I recently had a little one who was 3 that came to see me for an evaluation. And again, the parents were concerned about delays in spoken language. But boy, this little one can communicate in all sorts of ways with his face and his eyes and his expressions and his gestures. So these two components need to be equally considered. Also in social communication, consider the way in which your child engages you to share their interests. So if they scribble on a piece of paper, are they eager to run up to you and show you that piece of paper? Or if their favorite shows up on TV, are they eager to turn to you and back to the TV to get you engaged with it? So sharing interests versus really just staying in their own world. What does their play look like? So are they a little one that has a lot of imaginative and pretend play? I recently had a little one in my office who picked up a block and went and used the block as an airplane. That's an example of pretend play. That block didn't look like an airplane. It didn't say airplane, but he was able to use his imagination to use that block in a way that it was not intended to be used. Let's turn our attention for a minute to repetitive stereotyped behaviors. In this category, one of the things we're going to consider is how they move their bodies. A lot of times when you hear autism, one of the repetitive movements that people consider is either tiptoe walking or hand or finger flapping. Another one that people sometimes talk about is peering. So kind of looking out of the side of their eyes at something. But I've worked with adults who have more discrete, repetitive movements. I recently had an adult in my office who did kind of a twitch with his neck. So they can be a little bit more discrete. Repetitive speech. Do they use speech in a very repetitious way? Maybe your child echoes everything that you say. Or maybe they have a favorite show and they repeat a line from that show over and over, even in contexts that it's not appropriate. I had a little one that I worked with who loved Tigger, and he would repeat over and over part of the Tigger song that went fun, 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 over and over. We look at their play. Sometimes what we see with individuals with an autism spectrum disorder is a lot of repetitious play. They're spinning the wheels of the cars and they're lining up their toys, or they're opening and closing doors on an airplane instead of really engaging in that imaginative play. Routines and rituals, very common in kids. Kids need routines. We have in our house a routine for bed and a routine for the morning, a routine for school. But when a routine begins to interfere in functioning, that's when we need to start thinking about it. So sometimes kids will have a specific route that they need to take to school, or a specific order they need to get dressed in, or they will only have one kind of chicken nuggets from one store. So we think of the way that these routines become very rigid and then begin to interfere. Interests can become very repetitive. So when a child has an interest that is either abnormal for their age, that might be a little red flag. I had a little boy who was only interested in the Wall Street Journal. Or they have an interest that's very typical for their age. Trains is a great topic because so many kids love trains. But then when it becomes an interest that's so stereotyped and so intense that it starts to interfere in their relationships and the way that they play, that's something we want to watch out for and pay attention to. So a child that likes trains is one thing, but then a child who likes trains and knows all the train schedules and knows how all the parts to the train works, and they know all of the different components to the train, and that's all that they're willing to play with, then we might have a little bit of a red flag there. And the last thing I'll mention is sensitivities. The reason I have sensitivities in parentheses here is because sensitivities are common for a lot of neurotypical and neurodiverse populations. So we can have a child who's extremely sensitive to certain lights, sounds, textures, or we can have a child on the opposite end of that who's more hyposensitive and they don't have that discrimination as well. And so you might have a child who doesn't experience pain as well. Or you might have a child that when it's snowing outside goes out in shorts because they don't experience that sensation of cold. So those are some ways that you can begin to think about your child and whether your child may be neurodiverse.
These are all great points, and I've certainly learned a lot. And I know that those parents who maybe haven't seen any of those features are probably thinking, wow, I'm lucky my kid is, seems to be on track. But there were also little things I was thinking about in there for parents that can really benefit from taking those moments. For example, if your child is really fascinated with a topic, enter that world and share that world with your child. And that can be a way of almost like what we call parallel play at first, but then really getting involved with your child and finding some common ground so that if your child is neurodiverse or has some position on the autism spectrum, you have that little entry so that it isn't just driving you nuts, because some of those repetitive things can really become annoying to an adult. It's hard enough to be a parent. But I know you have some other points that you want to make, so I'll let you continue.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because it also gives you an opportunity to share in an interest, which is something we talked about under social communication. So we can use those pieces to help expand on other areas as well. There was some additional questions that came up from our parents that were related to this area that I wanted to address here. A lot of parents had questions about how can we improve verbal communication in the home. And I'm just going to mention it briefly here because we'll address it in more detail later. There's a method called pivotal response training that I will talk about later. That's a great technique that parents can learn in order to elicit more language in the natural environment and in the home. So we'll talk about that later. And another thing I wanted to mention was a picture exchange communication system. It's called PECS for short. And I've included a sample of a PEC right on your screen, that homework PEC. What this does for kids who are more visual, it allows us to pair visuals with words, with language, with verbal language. And we can use these PECs to begin to implement some functional routines in the day. So sometimes people create these PEC boards, even using Velcro, to create a morning routine. Well, they will have these PEC pictures of getting dressed, of using the restroom, of brushing teeth, of eating breakfast, and there'll be a word associated with each of these. And so in that fashion, a child can begin to expand their verbal communication and their vocabulary. At the end of the presentation, I did include a resource for even some free PECs. The website is called Do to Learn, with the number 2 for the 2, do2learn.com. They offer a lot of PECs on that website and even some free ones. But there's even starter kits that you can get on Amazon for this type of system.
This could be used for really young children too, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all based on their level, and you can make it as complex or as simplistic as you want, just depending on their level of development with their language.
Great tip.
So sensory topics, again, a lot about sensory issues, very common in neurodiverse and neurotypical populations. And as I was preparing some of these materials, these are things that I've even used in my home with my own children. Some sensory issues we can look at and think, are there replacement behaviors that we can teach that are more socially acceptable, are safer, are more sanitary? So let me give you some example of replacement behaviors. So some kids, for example, may have a lot of chewing issues. May chew on their collars. I've seen some pretty wet collars from kids chewing on them, chewing on their fingers, chewing on their hair. If chewing's an issue, there's specific chew fidgets that are sold, which can be more socially acceptable and also just more clean. And those are sold many places, but another resource is somewhere called therapyshop.com that offers a lot of these fidget and sensory tools. Some kids' sensory issues include more picking at skin, or even kind of tickling their face or their mouth. For that, something that has sometimes been effective is finding a way to occupy their hands and using something in their hands as a sensory outlet. So anything like putty, squeezies, any kinds of fidgets. And I would really try and partner with your child's school in this and talk to them about allowing your child to have these kinds of things at school so long as they don't interfere. So I would try out therapyshop.com. They sell a lot of these neat sensory devices that we can begin to think about in replacing some of those behaviors. In line with that, you know, how do we support our children that have these sensitivities? And I would say, as much as possible, for us to be prepared and anticipate situations in which we might see an escalation in these sensory behaviors. And what I mean by that is, for example, anxiety can produce a spike in somebody's sensory seeking, because it can also be a way to soothe. So some of the things that I have done with the kids I've worked with is help them create a sensory kit And they can keep these sensory kits in their car, at school, at home, and it's a special box they can turn to when they're feeling overstimulated or getting anxious. The sensory kits might have some of the sensory tools we already touched on, but they might also have a set of headphones that they can put on in case the noise becomes too intense in the environment around them. It might include a sleep mask that they can wear when the lights get too bright or start to bother them. Some kids respond well to weighted blankets or to brushing. We talked about chew tools. Some kids have placed a parent's t-shirt in the sensory box with their parent's scent on it. So the sensory kits are very specific to the child. And then, of course, teaching our kids how to cope can be important as well. So teaching things like deep breathing and relaxation to control some of those responses to overly stimulating circumstances and really getting the help of a therapist to be able to do that. And we always want to reward those replacement behaviors. I think we know as adults how difficult it is to break habits and break things that we do that may soothe us, that may not be effective. So whenever we can catch our kids and help our kids with those more appropriate replacement behaviors and reward their efforts to soothe and to use these things that we're talking about, we always want to try and do that as well.
When I was a teacher of fifth graders at several points during the year, I would ask my students what has been the most bitter and the best about the last quarter or the last semester. And one of my students said, and he was a really good student, he said, I liked the research projects, but they just took so long and it seemed like I never got done. And I realized I needed to build in rewards along the way, pace it, manage it, help them manage it, give them the little rescues along the way so that they didn't feel like they were sort of abandoned in it. So I think these short-term goals, these little rewards, these recognitions, checklists, calendars, all those kinds of things can really make a difference in how the children progress and how they feel about it, because they don't want to feel different. They want to feel like everybody else, and they want to feel like they're progressing like everybody else too. And that's a tough aspect of it.
And I would say that this can be an effective strategy for neurotypical children as well. And sometimes in families that have a neurotypical and a neurodiverse children, I really recommend getting them both on a reward system where you're going to reward them both on maybe a different behavior, but all of us can use improvement in a certain area. And that's really the goal of this. You know, let's reward each other for what we're working toward.
Well, I did want to mention here, Dr. Barrett, that you were part of the team that worked with Lingokids to help reorganize the content and create some new content that really helps children who fall into this neurodiverse category. And it was actually the children and the parents that discovered this in our content and said, hey, this is helping us. So as a result, we reorganized and refocused a little bit. So for those of you listening, be sure you check out what we have available to you, because we're really excited that this is happening, and we plan to do a lot more too. But one of the areas that had a lot of questions and a lot of interest was that of sleep. And all parents, moms, happy Mother's Day yesterday. I know you just wish you could have slept all day long, probably. So give us some tips. Help us out with that.
Isn't that true? Sleep is always an issue across all ages and all categories. So let's talk about a few quick tips. There's so much to sleep. I think we could do a whole webinar on sleep alone. But let's talk a little bit about sleep. There was a lot of questions not only about sleep, but about fears around sleeping. So I'm going to try and hit on all of that here. So I'd always say the first step is to investigate what is getting in the way. And you know what I always tell parents? Ask your child, talk to your child. For some kids, that's going to be harder than others. But if they have some language, ask them, what's happening? What's going on? Some child might say, so-and-so told me a story about a monster that lives under the bed. For another child, they might say, I can't turn off my brain at night. So let's try and figure out what is getting in the way. Is your child overly tired? Do we know if a specific fear is preventing them from going to sleep? Are they hungry when they go to bed? Are they worrying? Because that information will allow us to better plan how we're going to work on sleep. And sometimes this is an area that we elicit help from a therapist to really discover what may be getting in the way. So once we've done some information gathering, we want to teach them some strategies to help cope with that nighttime and help cope with going to sleep. And again, this might be somewhere where we get help and support from a therapist. But some of the coping strategies can include deep breathing exercises, muscle relaxation, so focusing different areas that's holding tension in our bodies and how we let go of that. For older kids, it might involve reframing some of the thoughts they have that are getting in the way of them going to sleep. So for older kids, sometimes they worry about what's to come the next day. And so we can talk about how do we take that thought and make it into something more realistic that doesn't hold as much worry. There's also a lot of apps out there now that can really help with this coping process. So two of the ones that I like to recommend for sleep are Calm and Headspace. And they're very similar, but you can pick and choose what to use from the app, but they include everything from breathing exercises to white noise or different noises to bedtime stories and meditation. So these kind of coping strategies can really help with that sleep process. And then we want to create a sleep-friendly environment. Sometimes there's so much chaos in the sleep space, it's no wonder that kids can't sleep. And this is where I always say, get your kids involved. It makes the process really fun. You'll hear me say that a few times, but get your child involved in creating that sleep space for them. Nowadays, there's fun night lights we can get. There's stars that project on the walls. There's sensory items. So for our sensory kids, there's weighted blankets and taggy blankets. Those were always a big one for my kids, the taggy blankets with the little bumps on them. There's these really cute stuffed animals called worry eaters that have a zippered mouth. You can find them on Amazon. So we teach kids that when they're going to sleep, if they have worries, they can zip away the worries in the worry eater's mouth, and the worry eater will eat them. A lot of kids love the heated pillows. Some have a lavender scent that's very soothing, and others are unscented because some kids don't like the lavender scent. Sound machines, etc. So let's create an environment. Establishing a routine. And that routine should be maintained even on the weekends, which can be really tricky. So for some kids, they're going to need visuals to go along with their sleep routine. And remember the PECs we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. This could be a nice integration of those, making a sleep routine so that a child knows what to expect every night, 1 to 2 hours leading up to bedtime. What will that look like? Will it look like we brush our teeth, we lay out clothes for the next day, we read, we can do a prayer for those of you who pray, or maybe we answer one question from your question jar. Whatever it looks like, maintain that routine and the consistency with it. And then doing things like minimizing caffeine and avoiding blue lights. Really hard with some of those older kids to get them off their phones, but at the very least, change the setting on the phone so that it's not emitting so much blue light. And
I noticed that I'm sorry. I just noticed that you were using the word we a lot. And when I have my grandchildren staying with me, and I homeschooled them during COVID, and they stayed overnight, Monday through Thursday. So I was doing bedtime routines, and they were 5 and 10 at the time. So a lot of what I was doing for my bedtime routine, we were doing together. And it was a little bit different than what they were doing at home, but we had to talk about that and adjust the routine. And I had to adjust my routine too, because I was serving as the parent.
Yes. I say we because I have 2 kids at home. I guess I should have made that part of my introduction. But yeah, so a lot of this applies, and I've repeated this a number of times, both in neurotypical and neurodiverse populations. We just have to individualize it to our children's needs. And like we said, we're always big on rewarding for success, and we want to set children up for success and really reward them for the successes that they have around bedtime routines. And we'll talk more about how to set up an effective reward system in a little while. I just read in a book a really interesting idea for bedtime, and that's to give children bedtime passes that they keep under their pillows. So this would really be for the kids who call 5 and 10 times a night for their parents before they go to sleep. And a simple reward system would really be based on how many passes they have left the next morning. And so you're rewarding them for not calling you so many times in a night. And I thought that was just a really nice, concrete, quick tip. We talked a lot about the consistency already. So there are some things to help you with sleep.
Well, and that's great, because this actually gave a little bit of a segue to the next topic, which is behavior and self-image. And since we're going to be running out of time, I'm going to put you on fast forward here. Tempered tantrums, self-image, self-management. What can you help us out with here in the remaining time that we have?
Okay, great. So I'm going to briefly introduce social stories, and then we'll talk about tantrums because that was a biggie. I do want to just cue our audience into something called social stories because I think they can be helpful for a lot of kids. And I included a reference later to some of Carol Gray's work because she was the one who really found this concept of social stories. And it's the idea of developing stories to prepare our kids for the social world out there. Because a lot of times what happens is children on the autism spectrum have a difficult time navigating the social world. And so as much as we can prepare them with stories and individualize those stories to your own child, the more that they'll be prepared. So let me give you a quick example. If your child has a hard time interpreting a social cue, perhaps of a group of people talking next to them, a social story might be, a group of people are talking next to me and I feel angry because I think they're talking about me. But even though I feel this way, they're probably not talking about me. So when I feel this way, I can, and then fill in the blank, use my calming kit, take 10 deep breaths, whatever works for your child. So these stories can be around morning routines, around preparing to go to school, around anything that applies for your child, but it's a way to prepare them for the social world that they're going to face. So it can be a really great tool. Here's a quick example of a social story about facing bullies and dealing with bullies. So whatever works for your child, you can even include pictures. So I'm going to move forward into talking a little bit about tantrums because I know I'm aware of the time, Suzanne, so thank you. So let's talk a bit about tantrums. This was a big topic as well, another one for a whole webinar. Let me give you some quick pointers, and then again, I've included resources for you. Before we can think about what to do with tantrums, we have to figure out what is driving the tantrum. And it's a step that's really important that a lot of people miss. We call it the antecedent. So if your child's throwing a tantrum because they want your attention, and then you give them all this attention to try and get them to stop tantruming, we're probably going to get them to tantrum even more because they're getting a lot of attention. Or if they're throwing a tantrum because you've asked them to brush their teeth and now you put them in timeout, now they've gotten out of brushing their teeth. It's kind of worked. So we have to figure out what is driving the tantrum first, because we don't want to behave in a way that's going to increase that behavior. The second thing we want to do is we want to select a target behavior. So if your child is tantruming a lot and they're kicking and they're screaming, we want to choose a target behavior to replace that and frame it positively. So if kicking is what we want to get rid of, our target behavior is going to be calm body. And we may even choose to take pictures of your child having a calm body so they can see exactly what their target behavior is. We want to make it as concrete as possible for them. I used to tell people, take a Polaroid of your child doing the behavior. Polaroids are outdated, but whatever works to capture your child engaged in that behavior. We want to teach them the coping strategies to be able to achieve that behavior. So for someone that's kicking and screaming, we better give them alternatives. So maybe it's smashing ice on the ground. Maybe it's screaming into a pillow or jumping on the trampoline. And those are the behaviors that we want to reinforce. So we want to make sure to teach them how to cope, and really important, have them practice those behaviors when they're not throwing the tantrum. We call it positive practice. So we say, let's go out and practice what it would look like if we were going to do this and if you were going to have these behaviors. And then let's reinforce them for it. Get them involved in motivators. What's going to motivate your child isn't what's going to motivate my child. Ask them what they want to work toward. I've had kids say, I want my dad to jump in the pool with all their clothes on, or I want to have pancakes with chocolate chips for dinner, or I want to choose movie night for my family. There's so many different things that can motivate children. So get them involved in creating those motivators. They don't need to cost anything. They can just be fun things that the child is motivated for. So that piece is really important. Also remember that for younger kids, you're going to want to reinforce them more throughout the day. We're going to want to reinforce them maybe in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. And you could do this in different ways. Sometimes parents just use a dot-to-dot chart where they're connecting the dots every time their child engages in the positive behavior. And then after 10 dots, the child earns something. Or you can do a token jar or a level system. There's lots of different ways to do this, but make sure to involve your child. And then just reevaluate it as needed.
I was thinking about what you were saying about behaviors and interventions, because my son was a master at throwing tantrums when he was 2 and 3 years of age. And he figured out that I used reading a story aloud to him as a way to distract him when I saw that he was starting to melt down. Now, he was, of course, in a way manipulating me, because he got to where he would say, Mom, I think I just need a book, as his behavior started to devolve, because he knew I would drop everything and read him a book. So I guess in a way it worked out okay. And over time, he realized too that those tantrums that he had gave himself headaches. And he quit having tantrums, he told me this later, because it just made him feel so miserable. So the whole idea of giving him something, giving your child something to use for the movement, like the trampoline, which I also had for my sons, is just such a great way of getting them into something that's a little bit different. And I would also just interject that movement with my son, who had trouble learning and spelling and reading, we used to kick a soccer ball back and forth and have him practice his spelling words with each bounce on the trampoline. W-H-E-N, and he would bounce to each one. I don't know if it helped that much, but at least it kept him involved.
We did the same thing with my daughter in a jump rope. Yes. So integrating different modalities for learning, I think is great. So we're integrating the movement with the audio and the visual, all those pieces. Absolutely.
And it helped keep me involved. So
absolutely. Yeah. expect the behavior to sometimes get worse before it gets better. It's the classic baby crying in the crib. I remember sleep training my children, and I remember as we were doing this, the crying got louder and louder and louder and louder because I would always respond. And I had to hold my ground and be firm and be consistent, knowing that she was testing me to make sure I would maintain my limits and maintain those boundaries before it actually got better. So we sometimes see that.
Well, and we had one parent just write in and say that their child who is autistic has a real difficulty with transition. And I think some of the things you've mentioned with sleep, like getting your clothing out the night before and planning and giving, I used to just give limited choices. Here's 3 things you can do. Which one do you want to do? And let's plan for that. Do you have any other quick tips for transitions?
So I would say 3 things. I have found the use of time timers incredibly helpful. They come in the form of a watch. They come in the form of a box clock this big. And you don't need to know how to tell time. You set it, it's a red pie, basically. And the child can see the pie get smaller and smaller and smaller. You can look them up on timetimer.com. Those are incredibly helpful. Also, social stories can be incredibly helpful. So when there's going to be a transition, developing a social story around those transitions and practicing those social stories every day, every morning, so that the child begins to internalize. When I go to school, I'm going to do this. And then the bell is going to ring and I'm going to do this. And they practice those over and over and then again, internalize those. So there's different things we can do. One of the things I had up here too was give choices. Like you were saying, Suzanne, sometimes 2 choices where either one will work. So you can either continue to scream and I will walk away, or you can use a calm voice and earn a point on your point jar. And that's it. I don't care. It's up to you, but either choice. So similarly, giving the child some control to make a choice.
Great. Well, we have about 2 minutes left, and some people have written in about language development. Can you just give us about
I'm going to give you a quick and dirty overview.
Great.
And I've given you resources for this. Bob and Lynn Cagle developed a training called Pivotal Response Training, and there's trainings all over where you can get trained in this, and it's an idea to develop to elicit language in the home in the child's natural environment. So let me give you an example. If my child is barely verbal, my language target behavior might be for them to just echo my speech. And I'm going to use a clear prompt to do that. I'm going to find an opportunity to do that. Well, what does that mean? I'm not going to do it when they're tantruming, and I'm not going to do it when we're trying to go out the door frantically. I'm going to do it when it's in a situation that they want something from me. I have their attention. So they want juice out of the fridge. So I'm going to hold the refrigerator door and I'm going to say, juice. And I'm going to wait for them to make some kind of utterance back to me, some kind of echo back to me. We're sharing control because my child wants the juice. I'm holding the refrigerator door. And now we're sharing the control because in order for me to give them what they want, they have to produce an utterance. And the natural reward is then they get the juice. They're not going to get a sticker. They're not going to get a point on a reward chart. They're literally going to get what they want. So that's how pivotal response training is. If you think of all the hundreds of opportunities you have in your day-to-day life to do this with your child, it's so many opportunities to help them develop their language throughout the day. So please look into pivotal response training, and I think it could be really helpful in the home environment.
Well, this has been such a wealth of information. We could have gone on and on for another hour, but all of this will be posted on the Lingokids website. And I just want to say, as a grandparent, it's not just the parents you're helping, but it's the grandparents. I'm going to be thinking about this as I travel with my granddaughter shortly, and all caregivers who can benefit from this. So those of you that are listening, I hope you'll come back and listen again and find all of these wonderful resources, and watch for more from Dr. Barrett. Thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful evening tonight. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
To all you parents and caregivers, Lingokids is here for you. Our mission? To support you in your parenting journey and help you raise amazing kids. How? By offering you our top parenting tips, the latest in education news and trends, exciting updates about Lingokids, fresh seasonal content that your child will love, and a range of both online and offline activities that you can enjoy with your entire family. Be a part of our community of families from all around the world. For even more parenting advice and conversations, download the Lingokids app and explore our in-app parents community. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the Parenting Tips by Lingokids YouTube channel